Apologies in advance for the sound of this audio. I am traveling tonight, so I'm in the car. So it kind of sounds a little funky, but we're going to try to make it do what it do. Before we get into the topic of tonight's episode, the 911 EMS situation, there's a couple of things that I want to remind everybody of. This is the badge of the late Chris Hollingsworth, the Louisiana State Trooper who, along with his buddies, beat Ronald Greene to death on May 19th, 2019. This is his badge, and the red specks that you see on this badge, that is the blood of Ronald Greene. That is the blood of Ronald Greene. It's been 3 years, over 1,160 or 70 or so days, over 100 million seconds, and not a single person has been charged with the murder of Ronald Greene. Not one. Nobody has been arrested, charged, tried, convicted, sentenced in any court in the state of Louisiana. Not a single person. And there's no question whether or not this was a murder. It's on video. Body cam, dash cam recorded everything. So there's no question. It's been a long time. Too long. I don't understand why one family has to beg for justice, if that's what you want to call it. If that's what you want to call it, I guess, when you arrive on a scene and the person doesn't have a pulse, what should you do? That is the question. If there is no pulse, what should you do? When EMS was dispatched, the volunteer fire department in the area was simultaneously dispatched as well. Let me tell you something about my home state of Louisiana. Some of the smaller towns don't have a working fire department. They have volunteers. The fire department in a lot of small towns in Louisiana, they don't function the way fire departments in large cities function. So they may have a truck, but no workers. They may have a truck, but no hose. They may have a truck and hose, but no personnel. They may have hose, but no water. That has happened, okay? So the smaller towns are heavily dependent on volunteers. And let me preface by saying that I appreciate volunteers. I appreciate anybody who takes time from their family, from themselves, to go help other people uncompensated. It's appreciated. It's not unrecognized, at least not by me. However, I don't know how a volunteer, persons arrive on a scene, assess a situation, and see that someone does not have a pulse, and they do not act accordingly. The task that's at hand doesn't happen. So what is the point of being a volunteer if when you're called, you can't answer? You arrive, but nothing happens. What should happen doesn't happen. Because if you are a volunteer for a fire department in an emergency capacity, one would think that you have some sort of skills that has equipped you with what you need to do if you are called. Otherwise, what would be the point of volunteering? So the question is, did the volunteer personnel not know what to do in an emergency situation, or did they not care to do what needed to be done? That's a question that I have. Because when Ronald Greene was laying on the ground, bloodied, hog-tied, handcuffed, pulseless, volunteer personnel took vital signs? And I'm thinking he didn't have a pulse. So what vital signs were taken? Surely they didn't have a thermometer out taking a temp, or a scope out listening for respirations and a heart rate. There was no pulse. So what was happening? Was somebody trying to get a blood pressure? I mean, what was happening? I'm not understanding how Cindy Ott and EMS, Pafford EMS, arrived, and the volunteer personnel, all they had done was obtain vital signs. Because when you arrive to a situation, you're on a call and that person doesn't have a pulse. The clock is ticking. It's ticking. There's no time to waste. Every second is important. So, what do you do when you arrive on a scene and someone is pulseless? 10 seconds or less you take to assess for a pulse. And if no pulse is found, then you start basic life support. That's what is supposed to happen. What do you think happened in this situation? Let me tell you how many people were present. 4 Louisiana State troopers, 2 Union Parish deputies, police officers, 2 volunteer personnel, and maybe some others, maybe some people that I'm missing, and not a single person in 20 minutes administered any basic life support. No CPR was started. No CPR was started. 20 minutes. The clock is ticking. Every second matters, because you need to get blood perfusing through that heart. You need to get oxygen to the heart, to the brain, to the lungs, to all of the vital organs. Every second matters. And not a single person stopped what they were doing, which was washing blood off their hands, to render any type of basic life support. Not one compression happened. Not one person got down on their knees, put their hands in the middle of Ronald Greene's chest, and supplied him with anything. Not one compression. 20 minutes. At that point, 20 minutes, there should have been at least 2,000 compressions. 2,000 compressions should have happened in 20 minutes. There was 7 or 8 men standing around. They could have each taken 2 minutes, 250 or so, 2,000 compressions could have very easily happened in 20 minutes. But Cindy Ott, Pafford EMS arrives. Nothing has happened. No basic life support is being administered to Ronald Greene. Nothing. What happens is a conversation about the handcuffs. Because if you know anything about CPR, it is performed ideally with the patient on a firm, flat surface. But how can he be on a firm, flat surface when he's hog-tied, handcuffed, face down? He was face down for 9 minutes, right? And a conversation happens and she's saying, hey, Cindy Ott, Pafford EMS, you need to uncuff him because, again, they need him flat, really flat, so they can perform CPR. They can at least start it. And the Louisiana State Troopers didn't want to uncuff him. There was a conversation while the clock is ticking about uncuffing a man who had been unconscious for 20 minutes. Hadn't moved, hadn't said a word, nothing. 20 minutes, no pulse. And so she insists that they uncuff him. So a compromise was made that they would leave one cuff on his right wrist. This is a man who is deceased at this point. So they're going to leave one cuff on his right wrist. That was a compromise. She transfers, or they transfer, Pafford EMS transfers Ronald Greene over to their stretcher. They still have him cuffed, right wrist. And you're not going to believe this. You're not going to believe what happened once the compromise is made to, uncuff just his left hand, his left wrist. So guess what happens once they compromise? Cindy Ott, Pafford EMS, they get him on the stretcher inside of the ambulance. Do you know that one of the Louisiana State police officers decided that they would ride along to the hospital? This is one of the officers who stood around for 20 minutes and did not provide any basic life support. Decided, now I'm going to ride along to the hospital. But stood around for 20 minutes, wiping blood off of their hands, talking shit about how they beat him to death. But decided, I'm going to ride along to the hospital. I'll tell you why. It was the handcuffs. You see, handcuffs, that is the meth of the law enforcement industry. The handcuffs. They can't get enough of those handcuffs. That's the hit that keeps on giving. They are addicted to those handcuffs. And they can't be separated from them. That officer could have easily got in his own unit and followed that ambulance to the hospital. But oh no, baby, he couldn't be separated from those handcuffs. Never mind the handcuffs are on a dead person. A person who has been clearly deceased for over 20 minutes at this point, who has not verbalized anything, hasn't moved, unconscious, no pulse. He had to ride inside of the ambulance. What did he think? Ronnie was going to wake up? Did he think he was going to jump off the stretcher, open the door, and run away? What did he think was going to happen? Why was it necessary for him to ride along inside of that ambulance? Why was that necessary? Surely you wasn't trying to assist EMS with basic life support, because for 20 minutes you stood around and not a single person gave one compression. Not one. 7 or 8 men, officers, stood around. Not one single person got on their knees, put their hands in the middle of his chest and gave him one compression. Not one. Not one. Because the clock is ticking at this point. Every second counts. At this point, 2,000 compressions could have been completed prior to Pafford EMS, Cindy Ott, even getting there. And nothing happened. But you have the nerve to jump yourself into the back of an ambulance. And if any of you have had the unfortunate situation where You were inside of an ambulance or somebody you loved. You know how small, cramped a space it is, right? There's only enough space for the stretcher, 2 maximum EMS personnel. That's it. But this officer, who did nothing for 20 minutes, decided, oh, I'm going to ride along. And guess what happens once they get to the hospital? He still can't wrap his brain around the fact that the handcuffs should come off of a man that has been clearly deceased at this point for over 45 minutes. There's a conversation that happens at the hospital, and the hospital staff said, listen, we have to uncuff him because we need to transfer him from Pafford EMS's stretcher onto the hospital stretcher. Mind you, he is deceased at this point. The compressions, the 2,000 compressions that should have already happened, that may have given him a chance, didn't happen. There's no blood perfusing. There's no oxygen that is getting to his heart, his lungs, his brain, his vital organs. None of that happened. But he's having a conversation about the dope, the methamphetamine, the handcuffs. If this ain't sick, I don't know what is. I just need to know why it's not criminal for officers to stand by when a person is in need of basic life support and it doesn't happen. Why isn't that criminal? Why hasn't anybody been charged? Why isn't it criminal? I think it should be criminal to insist that a deceased person remain in handcuffs when it interferes with basic life support. CPR is ideally performed on a flat, firm surface. And you're not completely flat if you're handcuffed, if you're hogtied. There shouldn't be a conversation about removing handcuffs at that point. There shouldn't be any conversation about that. Why isn't it criminal? Why has it taken 3 years, 1,160, 70 days, whatever it is at this point, over 100 million seconds? Why hasn't anybody been charged in all this time? This is episode 2 of, I guess, 1,100, whatever it is. If I have to create a video every day, or one for each day that it has been since Ronnie has been killed and not a single person has been charged, I will do it. I don't want to do it, but I will do it. I will do it.